Wild.
Louis L'Amour.
I have collected perhaps more information on gunfighters than anybody. I know of one man who has 900 listed. I have slightly over 2,000 listed as men who were known gunfighters or pistol experts. And this information has been gleaned through years of research, not looking for that, researching Western material in general. And whenever I'd get an account of a gunfight, I'd just note it down. And pretty soon I'd begin piling up lists for people. So I've got quite a list. And in several of my books, in between the short stories, I've put little historical incidents in there, like some of the gunfighters I write about are not generally known at all and not mentioned. I have known altogether about 30 to 35 old-timers who were either early-day marshals or outlaws, one or the other. I baled hay in the Pecos Valley, New Mexico, with a man who rode with Billy the Kid, and not somebody who said he had. There were a lot of those around. But this man was on record as having ridden with him. He'd been wounded in gun battles that Billy was in, and he knew him very, very well. And I spent 3 months one summer baling hay down there, and at every lunch break or watermelon break, we used to take a watermelon break every afternoon and eat watermelon. I used to sit and talk with this man, and so I got the story right from him. Some of the really great gunfighters were men who weren't known as such, really. There were several who were Wells Fargo Express messengers, guards on trains or stages, who were terrific men with guns, and as good as any man that you've ever read about with a gun. But they didn't call themselves gunfighters or anything, but they were. A man who lived in those days had to know how to shoot. And what isn't understood by a lot of people is that one of the reasons so many men were good with guns in those days was that everybody hunted meat for the table. They started as small boys. Usually the father was working at some job, so if they had meat to eat, it was because the son, who was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, went out and shot it. And they didn't have ammunition to waste. So they used to give, well, my own grandfather did it with his father. My father did it with me, just I didn't need it. It wasn't necessary with us, but he did it as a matter of course. He'd give me 5 cartridges, and I was supposed to come back with 5 pieces of game. He didn't have cartridges to waste. So consequently, these men became good shots. That's where Annie Oakley developed her ability. She became one of the most famous pistol shots in the world. And she had started by hunting ducks and geese for the house, and then she began selling them to market. A man who was a gunfighter was simply a man who was good with a gun. It usually was a result of very steady nerves, very good reactions, good coordination, and a man might have no intention of being a gunfighter at all, but he might get into a disagreement, and because of his ability, he was faster with a gun, so he won. And after he won 2 or 3 times, he had a reputation as a gunfighter, whether he wanted it or not. But all of these boys who became gunfighters later grew up in what they call the border states: Illinois, Iowa, Texas, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee. They grew up in those areas, and they grew up hunting. So consequently, they were very good shots before they ever came west. Then a lot of them were buffalo hunters. It was absolutely essential to have these skills, and tracking was also necessary. Some men, like Chick Beaudry, became superlative. They became much better than others. This is anything, shooting pool or anything you want to do. Some men are just naturally better than others. And Beaudry had that gift of attention and concentration and that perception that he could see and hear and understand. Very few gunfighters wanted to be known as such. The story that a man goes around trying other people to build a big reputation very rarely ever happened. Probably not over 2 or 3 times the whole history of the West. And those were very young boys or else somebody who was a psychopathic case. Guns were dangerous, and these men knew it. And they carried guns because they were a tool of their living. You had to have them for many reasons aside from just shooting somebody else. A gun was a very useful tool. Anybody can carry a gun, but to know when to use it is the important thing. A gun in a holster is much more dangerous than a gun drawn, because that gun in the holster is always a threat. Once the gun is drawn, the chips are down, and there's no choice then. As long as the gun is in the holster of a man who knows how to use it, and where the other man knows he knows how to use it, many times he can keep the peace without ever drawing the gun. But once the gun is drawn, the other man is almost invariably going to shoot back. Men talked much more carefully in those days than they do now. You didn't call a man names very lightly, because you might get shot with the next breath. And the only time anything like that happened was when somebody was drinking. He lost his judgment. But gunfighters of all types and all complexions came from everywhere. Gunmen were like anybody else. There were all kinds and types. Jeff Milton, whom I knew very well, for example, was the son of the governor of Florida and a descendant of John Milton, the poet. And he was a gunfighter. He was for 2 years a Texas Ranger. He was 2 years chief of police in El Paso, and many years as a border patrolman. And he killed several men in gunfights, was a very vast man with a gun. But he was a well-educated, intelligent man with a good background. You found men like that, and you found others who came from the dregs, They're all types and kinds. But by and large, the Rangers recruited their men from ambitious young men, and I say young men, they were from 17 to 25 as a rule. They recruited them from local cow ranches and places where they'd shown their abilities. For example, one of the most famous Rangers, Captain Hughes, had some horses stolen from him before he was ever a ranger. He was just a rancher, but he didn't like having his horses stolen. So consequently, he followed these men and traveled for hundreds of miles, finally traced them down. He didn't bring the men back, but he brought the horses back. And the Rangers saw this and recruited him because he was the kind of man they wanted. And Beaudry, in my stories, Beaudry is the kind of a man who was almost an outlaw. He was on the verge of going one way or the other. And the Rangers got him just at the right time, when he might have gone the wrong way, and turned him into a ranger, and he made a good one. I narrowly missed seeing a gunfight myself in Medill, Oklahoma, between two men, one of them a state officer, another a man who was reported to be a gunfighter for a dope ring in the oil fields, named Wiley Lynn. The state officer's name was Crockett Long. Long was investigating Lynn. And I had committed Medill with another young fellow, and we stopped a car down at the filling station to get some gas put in and a tire changed. And we started up the street toward a drugstore, and we hadn't got there when the shooting broke out. What had happened was Lynn walked in the door. Crockett was at the back of the drugstore, bent over a table talking to a fellow who was eating a dish of ice cream, a rancher. When Lynn came in the door, and he said, "I'm going to kill you, so-and-so." Bang, and he fired. Long drew and fired so fast the two guns went off with the same sound. Then they walked toward each other. Now they were about 30 steps apart when they started shooting. And when they finally fell, they were just within a few inches of each other. Then one of the men got up and walked outside and fell on the pavement. Both men were killed. But the point was, each one scored 4 shots out of 6 when they were getting hit with 45 caliber bullets. And there are many cases of that sort of thing happening. And just because a man got shot didn't mean that he was going to drop. Cole Younger at the Northfield, Minnesota raid was hit 11 times. One of his brothers, I think, was hit 5 times. But men could soak up a lot of lead sometimes. The idea that a man always drops when he gets shot is a lot of nonsense. Major Butcher, who was no joke about the name, he was a military surgeon, and he probably operated on more people shot with large caliber weapons than anybody who ever lived. His belief was that if a man was mad, in other words, if he was pumped full of adrenaline, and he was coming at you in a killing rage, you had to hit him right through the heart, right through the brain, or on a big bone if you wanted to stop him. And there have been case after case after case of men who were shot again and again and still kept coming. One thing that has to be understood that's quite interesting about that period was that nearly everybody grew up reading Sir Walter Scott. And this was particularly true of the Southerners. So they acquired a whole lot of background from him, and this was the way they thought they should act and the way they should treat people. Many of them had no education other than that, just their reading. And so the Southern outlaws, as they moved west, carried some of that with them. One of the things you didn't do was bother a woman. It's very well known. Now, this is shown in the movies sometimes, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It simply never happened in the West. It just did not happen. Women were scarce and valued accordingly. And also, as I've said, a lot of the men grew up reading Sir Walter Scott, and they had his ideas of chivalry. They respected women, and you didn't touch a woman. There are many, many accounts in diaries and otherwise of women traveling back and forth across the West alone and never being disturbed in the least. If a woman got off a stage at a stage stop, when she went into the stage stop to get something to eat, if somebody didn't get up and give her a place at the table, somebody knocked him off the seat so there'd be a place. You didn't even bump into a woman walking in the street. or somebody knocking into the street. Women were treated with great respect, and this was universal all over the country. It was one thing where you didn't transgress.